The first instalment took us from the time when the Bible was widely available to an educated minority. This second instalment takes us to a time when the Bible became available to many more in their native tongue. We need to be aware that languages are not static. They're influenced by a number of factors. Immigration is one of them, and here are some of the influences on our language over the years. There have been invasions by Celts, Romans, Angles, Saxons and Jutes, Vikings and Normans, and there have been immigrations, there have been refugees fleeing to this country, and there have been extensive contacts with other nations, particularly in the context of empire. There was no complete translation known before the Norman conquest. There were some translations of parts of the Bible, and Bede is one of them, as was also King Alfred, and there are others. These all translated parts of the Bible, none of them complete, and you'll see that there are different languages and dialects into which they were translated. Here's an example of Old English. You'll notice there some obsolete consonants. Take, for example, the second line, the middle of the second line. Come, thine Reich, thy kingdom come. And in Reich, you can see the association with the Germanic origins of the language of the time. England was one of the last of the European countries to have a complete translation in its own language. Not until the 14th century did England have an English translation that was complete. And the first one was the Wycliffite Bible, named after John Wycliffe, the instigator of this translation, and probably a translator of part of it in conjunction with several colleagues. The English is rather stilted. It often follows the word order of the original Latin. The team translated from the Latin Vulgate. Hebrew and Greek manuscripts were not generally available, and the languages were not taught in great detail in university at that time. Here we have the first complete English Bible. After Wycliffe's death, his colleagues, particularly John Purvey, revised it and gave a more fluent revision. We need to remember that at this time every copy made had to be written out by hand. There now follows a recording of the Lord's Prayer in the language of Wycliffe's day, read by Dr. Phillips of the Leicester University.
The Lord's Prayer in the version of John Wycliffe, read in the pronunciation of Wycliffe's day. And thus ye schulen pray. Ure Fader, that art in heavens, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come to, be thy will done, in earth as in heaven. Give to us this day our bread or other substance, and forgive to us our debtors, as we forgive unto our debtors. And lead us not.
And now we see a contrast between the first Wycliffite Bible and the one that was revised after his death. Here you see that it's a rather stilted translation, and the spelling isn't what we would expect today. Spelling was not standardized until after the invention of printing with movable type, and it was printers who were largely responsible for standardizing printing. The revised version of the Wycliffite Bible is much more fluent. You'll recognize this perhaps as the beginning of the letter to the Hebrews in the New Testament. In Lutterworth, where John Wycliffe ended his days, is a memorial to him in the church. It's quite a large memorial and illustrates the way in which the translation, which he instigated, was used to teach the ordinary people in their own language from that translation. And outside in the street, at a junction, is this memorial to him as well. The four faces of the memorial illustrate his importance. He's described here as the morning star of the Reformation and the first translator of the Bible into the English language. And we have some quotations, and this is where he ended his days, 1384, in Lutterworth as rector of that parish. Wycliffe not only translated or instigated the translation and part translated it, but he also expressed his views arising from his understanding of Scripture. Particularly, he emphasized the importance of the Bible of higher authority than state or church, and was convinced that salvation is dependent upon man's state before God, not on the hierarchy, edicts and practices of the church. He was convinced that the church had corrupted the gospel message, and he cited as an example of that the doctrine of transubstantiation, which he described as a blasphemous folly. And he was convinced also that the church ought not to enjoy such wealth and possessions. You can imagine that that was not very popular with the authorities. And so his translation was outlawed in stages, 1401, heretics to be executed by burning. Then the English Bible was outlawed completely. And then for 125 years, it was illegal to own or make a copy without license. The penalty was death by burning. That seemed to be the favourite form of punishment. We need to note that the ban covered Bibles made in or since Wycliffe's time. The ban was circumvented in various ways. First of all, by changing the date, by removing the date, or by forging the date. Dating this Manchester copy to 1343, when there was no full English Bible at the time. Bibles were being copied commercially by 1420, and there was a thriving black market in them. We see, well, just how well a banned book survived. 250 copies, parts or whole, of the Bible, including 20 complete Bibles, nearly 90 complete New Testaments. It survived so well for a banned book. And a manuscript copy of the Gospels was given to Queen Elizabeth I on the way to her coronation. By comparison, we have early copies of Chaucer, just 64. Wycliffe's translation was not printed until 1731. Other translations superseded it, and these came after the advent of printing, so it was possible to circulate them rapidly without the delay incurred by handwriting. And the New Testament is reproduced in Bagster's Hexapla of 1841, and we'll come to that a bit later. This second instalment has taken us to a time when the Bible became available to many more in their native tongue. The next instalment shows us advancements in translation. Until then, farewell.